right. 1 Maccabees. All right, so this is history. So we did have historical books in the Old Testament. These are additional historical books. Of course, they are not in the Protestant Bible. They happened after 200. Well, the actual history happened after 200 BC. So, yeah, it's like, all right. So, this is essentially a battle between Hellenization and Orthodox Judaism. Maybe. Okay, so we could say, I suppose, traditional Judaism instead. So, Alexander the Great, 333, introduced Hellenism. And it had an impact well into the Roman period. Eventually, it was the Romans who threw the Greeks out, but the Romans kind of liked a lot of what the Greeks were about. All right, the most important piece of this, at least for our books, is that in 198 BC, the Seleucids, which were Syrians with Greek influence, aggressively spread Hellenistic culture. Okay, so key there is, of course, aggressively. Now, the problem was also that a lot of Jews welcomed Hellenism because it was, for some of them, they thought refreshing. Okay? And so you're going to have this battle even within Judaism about Greek influence and Hellenism. All right? That resulted in a civil war. Between Jewish Hellenists and traditionalists. And in this history, you have sides changing all the time. Well, we liked you, but we didn't like what you did here, so we're going to their side, and then someone switches over to the others. Yeah. All right? The Seleucids, obviously, supported Jewish Hellenists. All right? Now, initially the Seleucids were welcomed. So, Antiochus III showed the Jews great consideration. Now, I'm going to go through a good deal of history here, and it has the potential for being rather boring. Okay. That's okay. All right, just follow with me because there are some things at the end that I think make a lot of sense once we go through all of this history. All right, however, Antiochus IV 175 to 164 was not so accommodating. Let me get his dates again. And this, of course, is going to be where the Maccabees come in. So his policies were determined, first of all, by he needed money to finance the military. His second consideration was that he needed people to be unified for defensive purposes. The only way in this time to unify people was under the same God. I mean, that's how they did it. You unify people under the same God. So when somebody conquered you, they forced you to believe in their God, because that was unification. This is why the Romans were so upset with the Christians. So the Romans were okay with Jews. The Romans like antiques. And Judaism is a religion of antiquity because it goes back 1,500, 2,000 years. And so the Romans said, you can live with the Jews. When the Jews threw the Christians out of the synagogues in 90 AD, Christians suddenly became a new religion, and the Romans could not tolerate that. And that's why you had persecutions. You're not Jews. You're Christians. You're something else. Okay? So in Antiochus' case, he believed they had to be unified under one God for defensive purposes, or there was no way to unify them, right? All right. Now, he did a number of pretty bad things. All right? So he forbid worship in Jerusalem. That wasn't a good thing. Even worse, he set up an altar to Zeus in the temple. Also not smart. It is called the abomination of desolation. You've probably heard that phrase somewhere along the way in your life. And that sparked the Maccabean revolt. All right. I'm not going into real detail here, just kind of detail here. Okay, so remember, you already have among the Jews Hellenizing Jews and traditional Jews. So that's a subtext to all of this. All right, so Maccabees was written in the 2nd century BC, and the manuscripts are in Greek.
saying it was written in Greek, or that's what we have?
You're right, the surviving manuscripts are in Greek, right. It's possible that portions of 1 Maccabees may have been written in Hebrew. Okay, not part of the Jewish Old Testament, also rejected by Protestants. Okay, so who are the Maccabees? Well, the Maccabees are Mattathias and his sons.
I thought I read something that, it's not, when you said some of it might have been written in Hebrew, it's not like Maccabees 1 was written first and then Maccabees 2 was written after, right? Or what, is that true?
Correct, probably not,
Okay,
yeah.
they're kind of, it's just a different
Yes.
way of interpreting the same events, kind of.
Or,
Different
yeah, or
stories.
it's different information altogether.
Yeah.
How does, or it could be, how does it come down to us?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it wasn't like, oh, part 2.
Yes, exactly, exactly, yeah. Okay, so Antiochus commanded the soldiers to force the Jews. Okay, so the Jews are forced to offer sacrifice to pagan gods. All right, so Mattathias killed the soldiers. I'm going to abbreviate this. And then fled into the hills, or fled to the wilderness. So if you are a Greek, Mattathias and his sons are terrorists. If you are a Jew, they are partisans. Interesting how that works, right? So, then they began conducting military battles. Again, it's guerrilla warfare if you are a Greek, and it is brave partisan fighting if you are a Jew. That's essentially an ambush here, night killing there, something like that. So that's how they started out, all right? Military battles. However, these began to expand, all right? Mattathias died, and then Judas took over. So a little redemption for the name Judas, right? He was a good guy here. Okay, and he was called Judas Maccabeus. Maccabeus is a Hebrew word referring to hammer, because they hammered the enemy forces into the ground. Okay, Antiochus responded with a larger force. So I think the numbers looked like 60,000 or something like that. Judas defeated a larger force with 10,000 soldiers. A miracle. So it was a decision, however, on Judas's part to meet force with force, okay, which, I turned out for him. they then began offensive campaigns. All right? They were able to at least take over Jerusalem. They gained a measure of religious freedom. But this was sometimes hampered by the high priest, Alcimus. So remember, even within Judaism, there were factions that were either pro-Hellenization or not. All right, Judas died. He was succeeded by Jonathan, 160 to 142.
So Alcinus, whatever, was very Hellenized, that kind of like Jason?
More Hellenized, yeah. Yeah, we have to be very careful about very and, right. Okay, likewise, Antiochus V died. And then there were two rival claimants to the throne. So Antiochus is obviously the Seleucid. And so you had the rival claimants looking for Jonathan's support. Now, can anybody tell me why this is not a good idea? What in our historical understanding of the Jews is this pointing to?
Well, wasn't Jonathan the one that solicited help from the Romans?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But essentially what happens is this is so historically Jewish.
Is it because they would fight over the throne, wouldn't they?
Sure.
We had multiple fights over the throne in the Old Testament.
Exactly. Multiple fights over the throne, treaties and alliances being made with people that you should not have been making treaties and alliances with. All right?
Isn't that still happening?
Huh? Yes. You have the same pattern going over and over again. All right? So, Jonathan eventually died, and it was because he was involved in Seleucid politics. Simon took over. (142 to 134). And he accepted the appointment as the high priest. That was not a good thing, because he was from the wrong family, and he was also a warrior, and nobody with blood on his hands could be high priest. Okay, you had to have some kind of purity. All right, he also was involved in Seleucid politics. Now, he further expanded the territory. However, and again, just remember the Book of Kings. He was murdered by a son-in-law. Or remember the Book of Samuel. We want a king. You have a king. But we want a real king. I'll do it, but you're not going to like it. Murdered by a son-in-law. Okay? The son-in-law was murdered by John Hyrcanus, who is Simon's second son. So now we have John Hyrcanus. If all of this sounds familiar, like didn't we deal with this a couple of years ago or last year? Yes, we did. Just different actors. He accepted the priesthood. Again, was not supposed to do that. But again, you have to understand that there was a willingness to give this person who was essentially a political leader religious authority as well. So they have authority over everything. Over everything. All right? So he accepted the priesthood. Again, expanded the territory. In 109, he destroyed the main temple in Samaria. So remember that there was no love lost between Samaritans and Jews. All right? Great. Get rid of that thing. However, because he destroyed that temple, a group called the Hasidians broke with the Maccabees.
Was that a temple to the Jewish God or the pagan?
I'm sorry?
Oh, was the Samaritan Temple a temple to the Jewish God or the pagan?
Greek, right, Greek or Jewish?
Oh, where's the
Well,
Samaritan
it was in
temple?
Samaria, so it was a temple that was erected by the Samaritans who were Jewish but not fully Jewish.
Mixed with the people.
Yeah, so remember Northern Kingdom. Yeah. that
So it was
the-
really a temple for the Jewish God, though.
Potentially, I guess. But you're supposed to
Potentially.
worship in Jerusalem.
Yes, you're supposed to worship in
Yeah.
Jerusalem, and they had no right setting up a temple in Samaria.
So in the illicit temple then?
Yes,
There you go.
it was an illicit temple essentially, right. Okay, so the Hasidians, they were Jews. They broke because of the Samaritan policy. So now you have a fracturing of the Jewish family here. The Sadducees, on the other hand, so we have this group, the Sadducees here by this time, backed Hyrcanus, and they were favorable toward Hellenization anyway. So, the Sadducees don't have a lot of good to say about the Sadducees, but I don't want to be unfair to them either. But the Sadducees essentially were aristocrats who were willing to say pretty much yes to any occupying force as long as they left their aristocracy and money alone. And most of them were more than willing to do that. Okay, they believed that the only books in the Bible was the Torah, the first 5 books. That was it, nothing else. And that's why they did not believe in resurrection. Okay, they couldn't find that anywhere in the first 5 books of the Bible. It's not mentioned there, therefore it isn't. Okay? So they backed Hyrcanus. All right, our next actor up here is Aristibulus the First. He's the eldest son. And Aristibulus the First was friendly to Hellenism, even though he was a Maccabee. All right, so we got a problem here.
Wait, he was the son of who?
He was the son of John Hyrcanus, yeah. So, friendly to Hellenism, unfriendly to his mothers and brothers. So, friendly to Hellenism, not to family. So, for instance, he let his mother starve to death. Okay. Not a good thing to do. He died suddenly after becoming king. Probably poisoned. And autopsies being what they were back then, they couldn't find it. All right, then John Hyrcanus' oldest surviving son took over. His name is Alexander Jannaeus. And as my commentary said, the first name says it all. He essentially was Alexander the Great, reincarnated, or however you want to put that. All right, very friendly toward Hellenism. So, the rebellion against Hellenism had come full circle. It was against Hellenism. We go through their history. They all got corrupted just a little bit more than the last one. And then the last one is very friendly to Hellenism, and essentially you have Hellenism winning the day. All right, so the Jews had a lot of problems with Hellenism. Because Hellenism is more than just a religion. It's not a religion at all. It's a cultural way of life. So the Greeks loved the human body. They also liked to see the human body naked. That was absolutely forbidden among Jews. So they set up these, we call them gymnasiums, they called them gymnasium, and they would exercise in the nude after spreading oil all over themselves. All right? So when we get to, next hour, we will get to Hanukkah. One of the reasons there may not have been any oil that hadn't been 8 days in order to produce new oil. It's usually what it took to produce new olive oil. And so, I mean, you know, Hanukkah, it's a 1-day supply of oil lasted 8 days. Okay, long enough to produce new oil. All right? That was a big thing with Hellenism. Forcing food on people, like pork. Okay? You know, all kinds of different things that seem to be very permissive to the Jewish people. And then, of course, you had the religious pieces as well, worshiping other gods, all that type of stuff. All right? So, eventually, as you saw here, they became more and more friendly to Hellenism, out of a sense of, if we don't, they will hurt us. They will kill us. They will do all kinds of things. All right? Now, what?
How many years was it? Like say from the start of the Maccabean revolts until we get to this point, how many years would you
Well,
say
let
that
me
is?
see what's
Approximately.
Alexander's. Oh, we're probably talking, yeah, we're talking close to 100 years, yeah. All right, and then you had the Romans beginning to influence. And so you had some Jews going over to the Romans. You had some Jews who were traditional Jews, and you had some Hellenists. Okay, so the Jewish tradition was kind of splintering.
You know, one of the things that kept going through my mind as I was trying to wade through all this thing, the gospel writers wrote their gospels in Greek. Were they Hellenists?
No. Greek was one of the major languages spoken in Palestine. And the recent Greek influence probably is also, so they would have all known Greek, probably known it much better than Hebrew.
That was 200 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the Greek influence, as I said, lasted well into the Roman period, which is well into AD 1, 2, 300 AD. Yeah, yeah.
Remind me, Socrates, Plato, when are they writing?
Much earlier.
So they're basically the part of the foundation of Hellenism. Aristotle was teaching, Alexander the Great was preceding this.
Yes,
preceded,
yes,
so-
this is all preceded, yes.
So their mindset, all of their thinking is kind of building what Hellenism is in its approach to
Yeah, yeah.
philosophy.
So this is a fairly well-established culture, yeah, yeah. With a nice pantheon of gods. Yeah. By the way, if you ever are wondering where the Sistine Chapel gets their idea of what God looks like, they could have taken me.
You are a spitting image.
Yeah.
You are a spitting image.
Many people suggest that they essentially did some modification of Zeus in order to put that depiction of God. The depiction of God isn't wrong, but God doesn't look like that. Because God's not a man. God is God. God is God. God's not a woman either, okay? God is God. But we don't relate to pure spirit. Pure spirit, please, I can't even, conceptualize that. But I can relate to a him God, or I can relate to a her God. If I'm looking for someone who is nurturing, loving, compassionate, I might ascribe certain characteristics to the female of what God is. Remember, wisdom is a female.
Chris does call God his father though too, right? So
That is correct.
It's kind of easy that way.
Yes, it is easy that way. But it's not exclusive. Not exclusive. All right? You guys are much better about this than Wausau was. not getting it. Yeah, at least a couple of them. All right, so Alexander takes over, rebellion had come full circle, and here come the Pharisees, and the Pharisees opposed Jannaeus. Okay, for obvious reasons, this, you're transgressing the law. Pharisees were very legalistic. All right, that's the history. But again, as we picked up as we were going, this seems to be a pattern for Jews when it comes to the kingship. They get corrupted, they make bad allies, they make bad treaties, and eventually it all falls apart. If God is not God, if God is not your king, then other things are going to fall apart. All right. So let's look at the theology of 1 Maccabees. First of all, people are to follow the law. Failing to do so results in punishment. The law is God's wisdom. The law is God's wisdom. And it's kind of like, I can hear the writers saying, how many times do you have to hear that? The law is God's wisdom. Here you have a clear condemnation of even the high priest. So this kind of goes with our first point. Even the priesthood was corrupted. And this lasted for some time well into the Common Era. The focus in 1 Maccabees is on the oppression of the Sadducees. In 1 Maccabees, the restoration of the temple is also critical, and of course that's remembered in Hanukkah. But remember that the temple was the center of all life for the Jews. Jonathan, so he would be the first in this line. Jonathan becoming a high priest was problematic. and then those who followed, who were also appointed high priests, equally problematic. First, he was a warrior. No man with blood on his hands can become high priest. And he was from the wrong family. So this eventually set up later the movement of a group of people from Jerusalem out to Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay? That was considered it was considered the priesthood in exile. They exiled themselves. They said the wrong family is taking over the priesthood. They can't be the priests, and so they moved. They picked up their community and moved out to Qumran, started a new community, essentially a community of the priesthood in exile. They still worshipped at the temple. They could still come in. But if you ever read the Dead Sea Scrolls or any part of them, there's a whole scroll in there called the War Scroll, which is when the Son of Righteousness is going to come and going to destroy the Son of Darkness and restore the priesthood rightfully to who it should be restored to. It's one of the things in the War Scroll. You have a lot of other stuff out there too.
These priests are referred to as the Essenes.
The Essenes, that is correct, yeah. All right. So, Jonathan here had much power and prestige. And this had or this was problematic. Okay? Power corrupts. Ultimate power corrupts. Absolutely. Right? All right? He remained in power a long time. So, each successor gets more involved in the politics of the Seleucids. Where's a good prophet when you need it? To tell them, don't do that.
Nathan.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a long time ago. All right, let's break there. I will just have a little bit more to finish up when we get back. So we're going over to Mayo. I think you have all from